Have you ever really wanted to do something, but you didn't do it because you were too afraid of doing that? Maybe there was a new job that you wanted, but you were too afraid of what moving to that new job can mean for you and your family's financial situation. And so now you're kind of in that area of what if? What if I had taken that position? What if I had been willing to overcome my fear? Maybe you really wanted to go up and talk to that guy or to that girl, but you were too afraid, and the fear of being shot down was just too much. So you never did it. Or maybe you wanted to give more financially to the church here. But again, you were afraid of what that would mean for the way that you live. Maybe you wanted to reach out to somebody new here at this congregation, or maybe you wanted to take part in a ministry that we have going on here, but in doing that, it would cause you to have to step out of your comfort zone, and you were just too afraid to do that, so you didn't do anything. God is calling you to where He wants you to be. God is seeking to lead you to the place that you need to be. That may be the relationship that you're supposed to be in, or the job that you were supposed to have, the person that you are to impact, the role that you are to play at this church here. Or it may be the life that is separate and apart from the sin that currently exists in your life. And God is calling this church to new and greater and better things. To come together and to be more unified, to be more of that community that God intended for us to be than we've ever been in the past. To be a greater and a bigger light to the community that we find ourselves in. To be more focused on God than we ever thought we could be. But all too often we are afraid of God's calling. It may cause us to take a risk. It may mean that we have to step out of our comfort zone, and we are too afraid to do that, so we don't do anything at all rather than allowing God to lead us to new and to better places. Our text for this morning is Joshua chapter 3. In Joshua 3, the nation of Israel is standing before the Jordan River, waiting to go into the land of Canaan. And if you remember the history of Israel, you remember that God had promised them this land all the way back in the covenant that He had made with Abraham. And through Abraham and his descendants, He had risen up His people. But eventually His people found themselves in captivity in the land of Egypt. So God sent Moses to Israel, and Moses led God's people out of captivity in Egypt. He parted before them the Red Sea, and they crossed over on dry ground. And through the wilderness, Moses led them to this very place to enter into the land that God had promised them. And when they had gotten there, Israel had sent 12 spies into the land to figure out if they were going to be able to overtake it. And when the 12 spies returned, only 2, Joshua and Caleb, said that they would be able to go in and defeat the giants that currently lived in the land. Personally, I think it's kind of funny that back then Israel was afraid of defeating the Giants, and today it seems nobody in the NFL is afraid of defeating the Giants. But they were afraid. They were afraid of the giants that lived in the land, and because of their lack of faith, because of their fear, God made Israel wander in the wilderness for 40 years. But now that generation that had not been faithful, that generation that had been fearful has died. And a new generation has come up. And they are once again in the same place, standing before this land that God had promised to give them. And again, they have the same choice that their fathers had. They can either go in and they can take this land for themselves, or they can run away in fear. And I'm sure that these people knew about what had happened in the past. And I believe that they did not want to make the same mistake that earlier generations had made. They wanted to do the thing that their fathers were never able to do. They wanted to go in and possess this land. God had promised it to them once again. He had told them that He would be with them and guide them into the land, and He told them that they needed to be strong and courageous. But you see, there was a problem. As I mentioned, Israel is standing before the Jordan River. The river is separating them from where they are and the place that God wants them to be. And normally it wouldn't have been that big of a deal to cross over the Jordan. But the Bible tells us that God had led them to this spot during harvest. The wintry, rainy season had just ended. And the snow that piles up during that time on the top of Mount Hermon has begun to melt. And that water flows down the mountain and into the Jordan River, causing the river to rise up and overflow all of its banks. God could have led Israel to this spot any other time of the year, and it would have been easy. But He chooses to lead them to this spot at the most difficult time for them to cross over the river. Have you ever noticed that when God tries to lead us to new places, it's always at the most difficult times? God never seems to lead us to places based on our schedule. There always seems to be a river in the way, some difficulty, something that we are fearful of. God leads us to interact with new people when we are the busiest, to new jobs when we are the most comfortable in our role, to give more when we are in the most need. He leads the church to new and better places through tragedy and through loss. And Israel is standing before this river. And they can do what their fathers did, and they can run away in fear and believe that there is no possible way that God could guide us over this river, because you see, these people had not experienced God parting the Red Sea. They had not had that personal encounter of the powerful majesty of God. And again, we can learn something from that. Because it is vital that each and every one of us experience the power of God for ourselves. We cannot trust that God is going to get us through based on the faith of the generations that went before us. And I think that's exactly why God chooses to lead us to new places during the most difficult time. Because we each need to have that pitfall moment that God brings us out of in order to develop our own faith and trust in Him. And so when He leads us to those places during the difficult times, it is so that when we get to that place, we know that we did not get there by our own power. but that despite our fear, or it may be better to say precisely because of our fear, we are forced to rely completely and totally on God. Israel can run away in fear, but that's not what they choose to do. Israel chooses to go into the land and take possession of that which God had promised to them. And so they begin by making preparations. Look at what it says at the beginning of chapter 3, verse 1. And they came to the Jordan, he and all the people of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. And verse 5, then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. God has led Israel to this place. But when they get here, they don't immediately go in and take it. But they take time to prepare. They take time to rest, to consecrate themselves, to prepare themselves for the journey that they're about to go on with God. And when God seeks to lead us to new places, we would do good to take time to prepare, to spend time in prayer and study and meditation to seek to discern where it is that God is leading us. But after 3 days, God prepares a path for Israel. You see, because we can spend all of this time in preparation, we can contemplate the fear, try to figure out where exactly it is that God is leading us, but eventually there comes a time when we must stand up and take action. God prepares a path for Israel. Verse 2. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, as soon as you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priests, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits in length. Do not come near it, in order that you may know the way you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. Verse 9, and Joshua said to the people of Israel, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, here is how you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, from each tribe a man. And when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap. How is Israel to know that God is surely going to lead them across this river, to lead them into this land that He had promised that they are going to be able to conquer and take this land for themselves? They are to know because the Ark of the Covenant is going out before them. The Ark of the Covenant has special significance to Israel. In it is housed a copy of the 10 Commandments, the foundation of their law. Some of the manna that God gave to Israel to sustain them during their time in the wilderness, and Aaron's staff that budded. But greater than all of these things was what was on top of the ark. On top of the ark were 2 angels with outstretched wings that came up and touched at the top. And below these outstretched wings was what was referred to as the mercy seat. This is God's dwelling place on earth. This is the place where the priests go to present the blood of the sacrificed lamb for the forgiveness of all the people. The ark represents the presence of God. The presence of God, God Himself is the one that is going to go out before the nation of Israel to lead them across this river and into the land that He has promised for them. And as the officers said, Israel is to follow the ark. They are to follow God because this is a place that they had never gone before. God is leading Israel to someplace new, to someplace better, but Israel has never gone this way before. And so they are to trust in God to lead them. There's this big river in front of them, and they are afraid, they are frightened about whether or not they are truly going to be able to go into this new land. But God is telling them, do not be afraid. Be strong and courageous, for I am the one who will lead you into the land. When God seeks to lead us to new places, to better places, He's leading us on a path that we have never traveled before. A lot of the times there's a river in the way from where we currently are to that place that God wishes for us to be. And we are frightened. We are afraid to take a step forward. But God is telling us that we do not have to travel new places alone. We do not have to face our fear by ourselves, but that God is the one that is going to lead and blaze the path before us, so that in the midst of our fear, our stress, our anxiety about the place that we are trying to get, the place that God is calling us to be, God is telling us the same thing that He told the nation of Israel. He is saying, do not be afraid. Be strong and courageous, for I am the one who will lead you into the land. But notice how Israel passes over the river into this land. Verse 14. So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and as soon as those bearing the Ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the Ark were dipped into the brink of the water. Now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. The waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away. At Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those flowing down from the Sea of Arabia, the Salt Sea, were completely cut off. And the people passed over opposite Jericho. I want you to notice that the river did not stop flowing until the priests put their feet in the water. The whole time, as the priests are walking up to the river, it appears that God is not at work at all. As they get right up to the bank, the river continues to flow like it always has. But in faith and obedience, the priests stepped in to the river. They stepped into the middle of the thing that they feared the most, and God did the rest. When God is calling us to new places, and that river is in the way, sometimes it appears that God is not at work in our lives. We feel that God is calling us to some place better, but there is absolutely no way to get from where we are over to that place. But God is calling us to be faithful, to begin making that journey to where He is calling us to be, to walk up to the bank of that river and to be willing to get our feet wet, to step into the middle of that thing that we fear the most, to step right into the middle of the thing that we don't want to do, because that is where God is calling us. And if we have the faith and the trust in God to step in to our fear, God will do the rest. Because I want you to notice the power of God in this story. It's found in verse 17. Now the priest, bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord, stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. And all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. God stood in the middle of that river. He stood in the middle of Israel's problem, in the middle of Israel's fear, and he stood there until everything that he wanted was accomplished. God stood in the middle of that river until the entire nation was able to pass over to the other side. I want to ask you this morning, is God calling you somewhere? Where is God calling us as a church? Is God seeking to lead you from the place that you currently are to the place that you were created to be? Are you confused? Do you not know where it is that God is leading you, what God's call on your life is in relation to your job or your finances or your role here at this church? I'm willing to say that probably you know. You're just too afraid to act. Are you fearful of where it is that God is leading you? Because there may be this river separating you from the place that God is calling you. There may be fear. You may have to do something difficult. You may have to step out of your comfort zone. You may have to enter into a place that you don't know how you're going to get through, but you're going to rely totally on God. Are you afraid? Is there a river in front of you? Because what God's message for you this morning is to trust in Him. To make preparations for that journey, to spend time with God, but then to get up and to act. Because God is the one that is going to blaze the path before you. God is the one that is going to lead you to that place. But we must be willing to follow Him. We must be willing to walk up to the bank of that river, the bank of our fear, and be willing to get our feet wet. Because if we are willing to trust in God that much, God will do the rest. And trust me when I say this, God will stand in the middle of your river as long as you need Him to. He will stand there until you are able to move and pass over to the other side, to get to the place that He has called you to be, because fear is no reason to not go to where God is calling you to be. Fear is no reason for us as a church not to look to God for the answers. Because God can and He will conquer any of our fears, but we must put our faith and our trust in Him, and we must have the courage to cross. If you're here this morning and you need the help of this church in any way, maybe you've never made the decision to follow God, to make God the leader of your life, or you're struggling with that fear. You're struggling with that river that has been placed before you, and you need the help and the support and the prayers of this congregation as you prepare to cross over. Whatever your need this morning may be, I would ask that you come as we stand together and sing.